So, talk to me about the narrowing.
Oh, yeah.
I really like the piece. I've seen it several times now.
Yeah.
Where did it come from?
Right. So, just to name it, The Narrowing is a duet made for Axis Dance Company. It was commissioned. I made it in collaboration with another dancer in 2011, the beginning of 2011. And then it was reworked. And now the other dancer has been replaced by another one, and it's been slightly reworked again. So it's been this evolving thing. It's been received very well. It's been shown many times. It's been toured around the country a bit as part of Axis's repertory. It was put in a short form on TV. And So You Think You Can Dance?
Yeah.
It's a wildly popular TV show.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to have pop cultural value as an artist who is trying to be innovative and not pop cultural. That's super interesting.
Yeah. What was that like?
I appreciated the opportunity, for sure, and I had a really positive experience being in the studios in Hollywood. Just even the crew, the backstage crew, they were awesome. They were totally on top of their stuff, and of course they had everything at their disposal that they needed,
Yeah.
So I don't think they felt any kind of desperation around the project. And it was like, oh, you need that? Sure. Oh, that? Sure. Everything is just like, yes, And that's the amazing thing. When you have that big of a reach, you can have that much funding, and then you can just have yeses splattered all over the place. It's so different from trying to be a solo artist in the Bay Area, for instance, Really radically different experience. So that was cool to have a bunch of yeses. That was really nice. Yes for a day. And I have tended to have a negative viewpoint of TV shows like that, because I think they, it's like cookie cutter art, they these are the shapes that people like to eat, so let's make those shapes.
Yeah.
However, I think they have some choreographers who actually are doing some really interesting work also.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that would be great on a proscenium stage aside from on television. So it kind of opened my eyes, actually. It's like, oh, some things about this I really respect. There's actually some really great artwork that's being made as part of this. And that's evidenced by the fact that they would even allow us to be there. That means they're open to things which are not just what America is comfortable with, America, the being that has a certain range of aesthetic value and artistic or art experience.
Right.
So that was really cool. I also appreciated it, and I think this is a great process or challenge for any choreographer. I love taking a work and cutting it down to 2.5 minutes. Awesome experience. I was a little nervous. First we had to cut it down to 3, and then they asked for 2, and negotiated 2.5, and okay, 2.5, because it's an 11-minute piece, so that's, 20% or whatever, 25, 22%, I don't know. That's a big cut. Yeah. And it wasn't just take an excerpt, because that just wouldn't have been satisfying. A 2.5-minute excerpt of the piece would probably not have had the appropriate arc, and just wouldn't work. So there was this whole excerpting of the chapters within the piece, and then putting those together, and then making changes, and then also thinking about TV audience and what they might want. But I was really determined to have the piece capture as much of the original as possible. So the important essences needed to be there.
Yeah.
In this coherent sense, and that was wildly satisfying.
Plus, you had multiple cameras and.
Oh yeah, right.
And I presume the camera, whoever's running the board, chose which angle to shoot.
Yep.
At any moment.
Right. Yeah, I had no choice over that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there were also people the people who were there in the studio. They just saw it you would see any show, any dance show. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So, just speaking the judges on the show, for instance, they see it like a theater show, and then the millions of people watching around the country and the world see it through the camera angles that are chosen, And I guess no one ever really talks about that. Like, those are different experiences. It's different artwork, actually, right? Someone's making a film and someone's making a dance. You know? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, but I appreciate that. And I had this funny moment where I was like, I wonder if the piece is better like this. Because really I was like, everything is condensed, there's no fluff whatsoever, it's all here, you get this arc there. But I realized, what was missing was there's all this slowness and stillness and repetition in the longer work, which just had no place on television for this show. And it actually does something important in terms of the work and the world of the work, and you can't collapse that down. So that's when I realized it was actually a different piece. It wasn't the same piece.
So what is the essence, or what is the 11-minute version? What's happening?
Oh man, so much stuff. It's one of these, in my opinion, wonderfully multi-layered works, where you can...
And let me ask you,
Yeah.
were you given any guidelines for the commission piece?
Make a duet that can be performed in non-standard venues, that could be potentially performed outside or blah, blah, blah. That's about it. I think there was an implied, it should have partnering, it should have some athletic moments, these kinds of things, which are like effective.
Right.
That was it.
And was it obvious that one of the people would be in a wheelchair?
Right.
Was it just any non-standard body or whatever the language is on that?
I actually can't remember. So Rodney Bell was the dancer that I made it with. And
Yeah. So it was actually made on him.
Yeah.
Yeah. He happened to be in a chair.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He can dance in all kinds of situations, right? But his default is to use a wheelchair because feels the most mobile that way, I mind the hell, excuse the cursing, I mind the hell out of his personal movement vocabulary, being in a wheelchair. And so that became like an aesthetic theme of the piece, or like a way of structuring it was like me matching his movements.
Yeah. And
part of that, this piece has all kinds of commentary about a lot of different things about dance performance. But one of them is just about how, or from what I've observed, of choreographers making work with people with and without physical disabilities in collaboration. And almost always the folks with disabilities are having to match the people without them and be like, so I'm the non-disabled choreographer, right? Here's my phrase. Great, you non-disabled guys got it. Now you folks with disabilities, go ahead and make your own version of that because I know you can't do that. And I was just like, let's go the opposite direction. I'm going to learn what you do, okay? So let's make this thing and let me try to match you as much as possible. And that ended up being really interesting, just visually.
Yeah.
So that was one of my organizing ideas for making material. And then the other one was around, it's actually an exploration of performer-audience relationships. That's the fundamental idea of the piece, which is great. That fits what we've been talking about. And about observing and about objectification. Because, we have said how dancers, there are these beautiful bodies that we can look at, right? That's objectifying a person, right? And it's that we allow that which lets audiences be comfortable doing it. Because like if you were just looking through someone's apartment window and you see them barely wearing anything and like moving around, just like, whoa, like what's going on here?
It's consensual.
Right, consensual objectification, totally. Yeah. So I had this thing about, okay, dancers are objectified, let's talk about that. And I had this thing also about people with disabilities are objectified, or at least reduced to their disability often. And, all the time, so like when I'm spending time with people who use wheelchairs, and we're like at an airport or something, that people will often say, let the wheelchairs through, right?
Yeah.
And I get it. It's a concise reference. People understand there's an unusual situation. It's like this. It takes more room. Let's do that. But what they're not saying is, please let these people through. Or there are some people using wheelchairs coming through, you know? So I had this
or
thing.
they'll talk to you instead of the person in the chair.
Totally.
Or they'll talk really loud to the person in the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I try to be extremely understanding and generous, but I also get angry.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I don't know what they want. Talk to them. I have no idea. Yeah. So one of the other commentaries in the piece is reducing Rodney, or who is now Joel Brown, this other dancer, reducing them to their disability. And like, there's this motif, right? And this is both this person with a disability whose legs are paralyzed. This is them walking, and that's like, ha ha ha, that's kind of a joke, right? But it's also used as a way of puppeting me, and so then they're reducing me to a little puppet, which is me being objectified. So both of us are being objectified in those moments, consensually, with each other and with the audience, you know. So yeah, I have this thing about how do we objectify each other, which is played with in the piece quite a lot. And we observe each other, and we applaud each other, and we cut each other down. So there's all this commentary about that. And then also I had just had this idea just for like a fun story narrative. You know, the piece begins, there's a red chair, which represents an audience member's chair in like a classic theater, right? The red chair is on stage. A guy who's dressed up in a dress shirt and black pants walks out and sits down in it. There he is, he's ready for the show. Some stranger rolls up beside him in a wheelchair. Anyway, so now we have two guys in chairs, strangers, and they're very close to each other, and it's a little uncomfortable. And so they're here for this show, you know, I imagine it's like an opera house, and slowly as this piece unfolds over the next 11 minutes, the world starts to get weirder and weirder, and things start to break down, and then they're struggling with each other, and they're dependent on each other, and the piece becomes increasingly surreal until by the end it's very far removed from where it began, and we've like basically cut the space apart, and we've broken down the walls, and that's like this very exciting narrative for me. Like, what if you went to a show and someone you didn't know suddenly became crucial to your life as the world were falling apart around you? So that's this like the fantasy story that I have around the whole thing. And then we use it to show all these different, you know, to basically make statements or point out these different dynamics that are taking place, you know, culturally around performing art and disability and dance.
Yeah. It's a really emotionally moving piece. I would have never said that, of course, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's this thing like some work is structured around such a clear narrative that you would have to fight very hard to not get the story or get the moral, and I don't like work like that. So I have this narrative which you didn't know, and probably a lot of people, probably most people who see the piece don't know. And I mean, every now and then someone will tell me something similar, they thought a similar thing. I'm like, oh, that's good, that's getting across. But that ends up not being important. I find that as long as my structure, like foundation for the work, is developed enough, that will allow or enable audience members to get something valuable from it, even if it's something else, because there's a coherent language happening on the stage, on the page, you know, the page of the stage. So that, for me, is the value of creating abstract narrative. I don't expect someone to get it, but it creates certain patterns of feeling and dynamic throughout the piece, which, you know, could echo other stories for somebody.
It was digested.
Nice. Great.
It was digested. It wasn't just a raw idea, and I, even though I didn't even want to have a story in my head about it, because I trusted the piece. It was just from the beginning. It was so obviously developed and coherent and safe. I'm not safe, but I didn't have to worry about having a narrative so that I wouldn't get lost in it, because it was just so physically and geometrically and everything else staged so competently that I could just stop and just experience it emotionally, or the emotion between the two characters or something. So,
right.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying about people showing the contents of the stomach versus what they've digested. So
Right.
it was a well-digested piece.
Thank you. Especially now that it's been, 2 years of performing it.
Yeah.
It's even more digested.
Yeah.
I love, so with Access, like we've gotten to perform this thing dozens and dozens of times, right? And every now and then I have a new idea. And I'm like, oh, let's do this. Or like, oh, this is because of this. And it just gets more and more honed. I love that.
How much has
a wonderful
it changed
experience.
in 2 years? 10%?
A lot of people might not notice just because you can only remember so much of what you see anyway. Well, it changed pretty significantly 6 months after it was first made. We got new music. I inserted all the stuff about paper and referencing a program, like a paper program, which is all about transmitting meaning to an audience. That's, for me, it's the symbol of that, and we end up tearing it apart, right? Saying maybe we can't get meaning across. So I added all of that, and we added all these like finger puppet sections, which are super slapsticky, but address this notion we've been talking about around objectification and personhood. And then since then, it's just been little refinements here and there. And, putting the piece on So You Think You Can Dance, putting on TV also gave me some new ideas and some, it seems like you can add infinite detail to something. So I'm just finding what are some of the important details that haven't been here yet. And they won't make or break the piece, but they'll make it that much better crafted. Yeah. I actually wonder, am I ever going to make a piece that good again? It feels really good, but it also feels so early in my career, surely I'll be able to get beyond that. I don't know, sometimes things just work out. There's no guarantee for whether or not your work is going to be impactful. I don't know what it takes to do that, which I guess is part of the mystery. That's why it's art, not science,